Have you ever made a decision just to show someone that you could? Maybe it wasn't your best decision, but you did it anyway, driven by a need to prove a point. Well, imagine if that one moment, that one choice, ended up completely changing your life. Let me take you through the story of Elena Rivera, a woman who did exactly that. She made a choice, a bold one, to hire a boyfriend for $500. Seems pretty simple, right? But little did she know, that decision would unravel a series of events that would not only challenge everything she thought she knew but would also expose a man with a life much bigger, and far more complicated, than she ever imagined. Elena was your typical office worker, smart, driven, and focused on her career. But there was something about her ex-boyfriend Marcos that kept coming back to haunt her. It wasn't just that he had hurt her in the past, or that their breakup still stung, it was the way he kept acting like he still had control over her life, even months after they ended things. Picture this, it's the night of a big company party. Everyone's expected to bring a date. But Elena knows exactly what's coming, Marcos, with his smug grin and perfect new girlfriend, looking straight at her like he's one. She can't stand the thought of being the one left behind, stuck in the past, so she decides to do something bold. In a rush of frustration, Elena takes action. She decides to hire someone. Not just any someone. Corporate event companion, someone who could not only be charming but also help her get back at her ex. The idea? Make Marcos jealous. Make him feel what she had felt all this time. So, she takes out her phone, searches for a companion, and finds a profile that looks too perfect to be true, a man named William. The profile's brief, but it stands out to Elena. There's something about the way he presents himself, clean, elegant, professional, nothing like the over-the-top, cheesy ads she'd seen elsewhere. And his photos? They were the kind you'd expect from a high-end executive, not a hired date. A quick scroll through, and Elena can't resist. She contacts him, and they settle on the price, $500. For one night. Now, you might be thinking, $500 for a date? What's the catch? Elena thought the same, but the decision was made. She was desperate for control. For a way to show Marcos that she wasn't the same woman he'd walked all over before. The next day, everything was set. She was nervous. But it wasn't the usual kind of nerves you get when meeting a stranger. It was more like a feeling of anticipation mixed with a dash of regret. She had a plan. She had a date. She would make it through the evening, with or without the perfect guy. She was about to meet William. And as much as she told herself she wasn't expecting anything too out of the ordinary, she could feel it deep down, something about this wasn't going to go as planned. It was just another typical corporate event. The kind of gathering that, if you're honest with yourself, feels more like a necessary evil than an exciting night out. But for Elena Rivera, this one felt different. She wasn't just bracing herself for the usual small talk or the endless handshakes, no, she was dreading the inevitable. The moment when her ex, Marcos, would inevitably show up with his shiny new girlfriend, all smiles and looking like everything was perfect in his world. And what would he do next? Oh, he'd throw one of those mocking glances her way. Just like he always did. A look that said, "I'm fine without you, and you'll never measure up." It was his game, and he'd always played it so well, even when they were together. Marcos had this way of making everything feel like a competition, and he loved being the winner. But not this time. Not for Elena. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you were being made fun of or belittled, and finally, you just couldn't take it anymore? That was Elena's breaking point. She wasn't going to be the one left behind this time. She wasn't going to be the one hiding behind forced smiles and pretending she didn't care. This was her chance to take control of her own narrative. So, what did she do? She took matters into her own hands. Elena did the one thing she knew would throw Marcos off his game. She hired a date. Not just any date, but a companion. Someone polished, someone who looked like they belonged in a high-powered business setting, someone who wouldn't make her look out of place. She wasn't trying to find love or even someone who could pretend to be the perfect boyfriend. No, she just needed someone who could keep her company for a few hours and, most importantly, help her make Marcos feel like he wasn't the only one in control. For just $500, Elena thought she could rent a boyfriend for the night, make her ex uncomfortable, and walk away with a sense of pride and satisfaction. What she didn't realize, though, was that this seemingly small decision would lead her down a path filled with secrets, lies, power plays, and, eventually, something much more complicated than she ever imagined. You might be wondering, what could possibly go wrong with a simple plan like that? Well, Elena was about to find out that sometimes, when you make a choice to prove something to someone else, it's not just the other person who ends up being surprised. She was about to meet William, a man who would turn her world upside down in ways she hadn't prepared for. As she walked into the venue that night, Elena could feel the tension in the air. The usual corporate buzz was all around her, people mingling, exchanging pleasantries, but in her mind, all she could focus on was one thing: how would Marcos react when he saw her? Not just with any date, but with someone who looked like he belonged in the boardroom, not the dance floor. Elena was ready for whatever he threw her way, but she wasn't expecting what happened next. There she was, sitting in the corner of a quiet cafe, her fingers anxiously tapping on the edge of her cup. Elena was staring at her phone, glancing at the clock, then back at her phone again. The nerves were kicking in. She had a plan. A simple, straightforward plan. But this was new territory for her. She wasn't used to hiring someone to pretend to be her boyfriend. She glanced up. And that's when she saw him. William. He walked in with the kind of quiet confidence that made heads turn. He wasn't just tall and handsome. There was something about him that made him look completely out of place in a cafe like this. His suit was dark gray, tailored to perfection. His hair slicked back just right. He had the posture of someone who was used to being in charge, not someone who was there to be someone's date for the night. And that's when Elena's first red flag went up. This wasn't just a random guy from a dating app. This was someone who, at first glance, looked more like a CEO than a date for hire. Elena's curiosity began to get the better of her. Could this really be the person she had hired? The man who was just here to pretend for a few hours and leave? She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. When they finally made eye contact, he nodded with a calm smile, then walked over to her table. His voice was smooth and measured. Not rushed, but sure of itself. "Elena?" "Yes," she replied, standing up, already feeling a little more at ease, though the uncertainty still lingered. They shook hands, and she noticed the strength in his grip. This wasn't a guy who did casual work on the side. This was someone who commanded attention just by standing there. The next few moments felt almost surreal. They sat down, and Elena felt like she was the one under scrutiny. He didn't seem nervous, not one bit. In fact, his calm, almost too calm demeanor made her feel like she was the one trying to impress him, not the other way around. He seemed entirely unfazed by the situation, and that made her more uncomfortable than she was willing to admit. As they started discussing the details for their relationship, Elena couldn't help but notice how seamlessly he went along with it. Their story, how they had met, where they had gone on their first date, the little things about their relationship, all flowed easily, as if they had rehearsed it 100 times. But the way he spoke about their supposed history didn't seem fake. He spoke with a quiet confidence, like he was used to conversations like this, not like someone who was just playing a role. The more they talked, the more Elena found herself wondering, was William really just a hired companion? Or was there more to him than met the eye? His sharp answers about her ex-boyfriend Marcos, his easy comfort in their rehearsed story, everything seemed a little too perfect. And when he started talking about business, investments, and the financial markets, Elena was taken aback. This was far beyond small talk for a date. His knowledge seemed too specific, too in-depth for someone who supposedly did this kind of thing as a side job. He mentioned a few details about Group, the company Elena worked for, and her brain immediately went into overdrive. How could he know that? Was this all part of the act, or was it possible that he had done his research beyond the small talk and charming demeanor? The more they spoke, the more Elena felt a growing sense of unease. William wasn't just a guy trying to make her feel comfortable at a work event. He was someone who had mastered the art of making people feel at ease in any situation. But why was he so good at this? Why did he seem to know more about business and finance than someone who worked as a companion? And why did he seem so detached, so controlled, like he was hiding something big? By the time the coffee arrived, Elena had stopped thinking about the plan she had set in motion. Instead, all she could focus on was William and his perfectly constructed persona. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a huge mistake, but at the same time, there was something magnetic about him. Something that made her want to peel back the layers, to figure out who he really was and what he was hiding. When they wrapped up the conversation and William handed her his business card, William Jiang, consultant, it hit her like a ton of bricks. This man, who looked and spoke like he belonged in a boardroom rather than a cafe, had a secret life. Elena wasn't sure what it was, but she knew deep down that she had stepped into something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. As she stood to leave, she looked at him one last time, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and suspicion. This wasn't the date she had planned. This was something else entirely, and she wasn't sure whether to be excited or terrified by it. Imagine meeting someone at a social event, and they seem completely normal at first. But then, as time goes on, you start to peel back the layers, and you realize they're nothing like you expected. It's like when someone gets hired for a job, and at first, you only see the surface. But as you get to know them better, you start to uncover more complexities about their life, their past, their motivations, their true character. The more you learn, the more you realize that they've been hiding things. And in some cases, those things can change the course of your life. That's exactly how Elena felt after meeting William. What she thought was going to be a simple, harmless interaction, a guy hired to help her make her ex jealous, quickly turned into something far more complex. The more Elena thought about it, the more she couldn't stop herself from analyzing William. Everything about him didn't just scream, perfect date, it screamed, high-level professional. It wasn't just the way he looked or the way he carried himself. It was the details that started to bother her. His knowledge of business. His ease at discussing topics that were way beyond small talk. There was something in the way he spoke about investments, market trends, and corporate strategy that told Elena this man wasn't just a guy looking for a quick buck. You know how it is when you start putting the pieces together about someone's life. It's like a puzzle where the picture starts to shift the more you examine it. At first, everything seemed fine, just another date, just another night out. But as the conversation unfolded, Elena realized she wasn't just talking to some random date. She was talking to someone who knew more about the corporate world than most CEOs. How could someone like that be hired to pretend for $500 a night? Every time she tried to push the thought out of her head, another part of their conversation would pop up. He knew about the restructuring of Group, her company. He knew about the financial intricacies she had been working on for months, even though they'd never discussed it in detail. How was it that a man who was supposed to be a corporate companion had access to all this knowledge? There were moments during their conversation when Elena found herself second-guessing everything she knew about him. When she hired William, she thought she was getting someone who was just there to pretend. But now, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to him. She had asked him about his background, and his answer had been vague, almost rehearsed. A little bit of everything, he had said when she asked about his career. But Elena wasn't fooled. His responses, although brief, didn't match the depth of his knowledge. He wasn't just a consultant, he was a man who had lived a life full of experiences that didn't quite line up with the simple, polished exterior he presented. As they continued to talk, Elena found herself both fascinated and unsettled. She had hired someone to play a role, but instead, she was beginning to feel like she had stumbled into something much bigger than she had signed up for. The way William navigated their conversation, how he picked up on little details, how he reacted when she mentioned business topics, it all pointed to the fact that this man was hiding something. The red flags weren't just subtle anymore. They were glaring. Later that night, as Elena walked away from their meeting, she felt a mix of excitement and dread. She was thrilled by the mystery of William, but part of her wanted to pull back. She had hired him to play a role, not to unravel the mysteries of his life. But it was too late to go back now. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she actually knew about him. He had managed to pull her into his world, and she hadn't even realized it until it was too late. Elena couldn't stop thinking about him on her way home. What was the truth about William Jiang? Why was he pretending to be something he wasn't? Was it all just a game for him? Or was there something deeper at play? Later that night, As the corporate event unfolded around her, Elena's mind couldn't help but replay everything that had happened earlier. She had spent the evening trying to keep her composure, trying to stick to the plan. After all, she was supposed to be showing Marcos that she had moved on, that she was fine without him. But as the night wore on, something about William started to nag at her. It wasn't just the way he looked or the way he held himself, it was the way he carried the conversation. How easily he navigated through different topics with a level of authority that didn't match the role she had hired him to play. At first, she thought it was just her overthinking things. But then, it happened. Marcos, her ex, made his move. And that was when Elena realized she wasn't just with any ordinary companion. William didn't flinch. As soon as Marcos tried to provoke her, William stepped in with a calm authority that stunned Elena. He wasn't aggressive or overbearing, but his presence commanded respect. There was a certain quiet confidence in his voice that cut through the tension in the air. He handled the situation so smoothly, so effortlessly, that it was hard for Elena to believe that this was the same man she had hired for $500. This wasn't just some date. This was a man who was used to being in charge. Used to dealing with people like Marcos, who were quick to try to dominate those around them. As the evening continued, Elena couldn't help but watch William. His conversations with her co-workers were flawless. He knew the right things to say, the right questions to ask. He didn't just fit in, he made everyone feel like they'd known him for years. It was like he wasn't pretending to be someone else. He was someone else entirely. And in that moment, Elena realized that William was playing a much bigger game than she was. As the night wore on, Elena caught snippets of William's conversations with others. When someone brought up a topic about investments, William spoke with such expertise and knowledge that Elena's head spun. This wasn't just small talk, this was a man who clearly understood the financial world on a level that most people couldn't even begin to comprehend. As a marketing analyst at Group, Elena had a pretty good understanding of the industry herself, but what William said went far beyond anything she had learned in her career. He spoke about hedge funds, derivatives, acquisitions, all these terms that, to most people, would sound like jargon, but William spoke about them like he had years of experience in the field. Her mind raced. This wasn't just a businessman in disguise. William wasn't pretending to be someone he wasn't. He was, in fact, someone much more powerful than she had ever imagined. Elena's heart started to beat faster as she tried to process what she was realizing. William was the kind of person who understood the stakes of power and manipulation on a level that few ever would. He wasn't just playing a part to make her ex jealous, he was here because he had his own reasons. And those reasons, Elena began to understand, might have been more complicated than she could ever guess. The night ended with Elena in a daze. The cocktail party continued around her, but she felt like she was in a different world. Her ex, Marcos, had been left in the dust. He was no longer the one who had control over her emotions. But now, Elena was left with a new set of questions: who exactly was William? And more importantly, why had he been hiding his true identity? Was he really just here for the $500, or was there something more going on? As the night drew to a close, and she said her goodbyes to her co-workers, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the man she had hired for a simple task was someone far more complicated than she had ever imagined. She had stepped into a world that wasn't hers. And William was no longer just a man she had hired to make her ex jealous. He was someone whose life she couldn't even begin to understand. What happens when a simple decision, made on a whim, leads you into a world of real emotions, complex relationships, and business power? Well, Elena Rivera's story is the perfect example. She set out to prove a point to her ex by hiring a man for the night, someone to pose as her boyfriend and help her show him she was moving on. But what started as a calculated move in a petty game quickly spiraled into something far deeper, something that changed her life in ways she could never have anticipated. It's funny how life works sometimes. You think you've got it all figured out. You make decisions based on what you think you need at the time, expecting things to go a certain way. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it, and Elena quickly realized that the man she had hired was no ordinary companion. William wasn't just some hired date, he was a person who would challenge her perspective on everything she thought she knew. After their initial meeting, Elena couldn't stop thinking about William. He wasn't like the men she had met before. He didn't need to impress her with flashy stories or pretend to be someone he wasn't. There was an authenticity to him, an air of mystery. Yes, but also an undeniable presence that she couldn't ignore. As the night continued, she realized that he wasn't just there to be a stand-in for her ex's jealousy. He had a certain depth that left her wondering about his life, his experiences, and the world he came from. You know how sometimes you meet someone, and you instantly feel like there's something more beneath the surface? That's how Elena felt. It was a nagging feeling that wouldn't let go. She had hired him to play a part, but now she was starting to question everything. Who was he really? Why did he know so much about business and finance? How had someone with so much power and experience ended up in this situation? Was he using her in some way, or was there something else going on? As the night came to a close and Elena left the event, she realized that what had started as a simple, almost petty plan had turned into something far more significant. It wasn't just about getting back at her ex anymore. It wasn't even about proving a point. Elena had crossed paths with someone who had a much bigger story, someone who had the power to change her life in ways she hadn't prepared for. Isn't it strange how sometimes the people who come into our lives in the most unlikely ways end up changing us? Sometimes, the most unexpected encounters are the ones that challenge us, push us out of our comfort zones, and force us to question everything we thought we knew about ourselves. Elena never imagined that hiring a companion for a night would lead her to uncovering a world of business power, hidden identities, and raw emotions. But that's exactly what happened. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that meeting William had set her on a path she never could have predicted. As she sat in her car on the way home, her mind racing with all the thoughts and questions swirling around her, Elena knew that things weren't going to be the same. The decision to hire a man for one night had turned into something deeper. She had stepped into a world of secrets, power, and connection that she had no idea existed. Sometimes, we make decisions thinking they are just small moves in a bigger game. We expect them to be temporary, insignificant. But sometimes, those small decisions end up being the ones that lead us into the most important, life-altering experiences we'll ever have. As Elena and William's story unfolds, it becomes clear that sometimes life isn't about following the rules or staying within the confines of your comfort zone. Sure, we're taught to play it safe, to stick to the plan, and to make decisions that fit neatly into the life we've already built. But what happens when you take a risk? What happens when you make a bold move and step outside that comfort zone? Elena was about to find out. When she hired William, she thought she was simply making a strategic move. She was trying to get her ex to back off, to prove a point, and in doing so, she was ready to move on. But she never imagined that her $500 investment in a fake boyfriend would turn into something much more complicated, something that would ultimately change her life in ways she never saw coming. At first, it seemed harmless enough. William was just a guy hired to show up at an event, pretend to be her boyfriend for a few hours, and then walk away. But as the night went on, and as Elena spent more time with him, she began to realize that this wasn't just a temporary arrangement. There was something more beneath the surface. You know that feeling when you think you know someone, but then, suddenly, they do something that completely shifts your perception. Maybe they say something unexpected, or they handle a situation in a way that makes you look at them differently. That's exactly what happened with William. He wasn't just a hired date, he was someone with real depth, intelligence, and a life full of complexity. As Elena got to know him, she started to see the truth. He wasn't pretending to be someone he wasn't. He was a man who had mastered the art of keeping a low profile while still navigating a world of high-stakes business and influence. Elena had hired him to help her get back at her ex. But what she didn't know was that she was stepping into a world of corporate power, secret identities, and emotions that would go far beyond what she had expected. The more she learned about him, the more Elena realized that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most transformative experiences. We spend so much of our lives trying to control every aspect, making sure everything is planned and predictable. But sometimes, the best things happen when we let go of that need for control and allow life to surprise us. Elena's journey was a perfect example of this. At the beginning, she had no idea that hiring a man to pretend to be her boyfriend would lead to anything more. She thought it would be a simple way to deal with her ex, but she was unknowingly stepping into something far bigger. Her $500 investment didn't just buy her a date, it bought her the chance to experience a life she never expected. So, what's the takeaway from all of this? Don't underestimate the power of a chance encounter. Sometimes, the smallest decisions can lead to the biggest changes. Whether it's a random meeting, a bold choice, or a risk that doesn't seem like it'll pay off, it could be the beginning of something much bigger than you ever imagined. Elena learned the hard way that life doesn't always play by the rules. And sometimes, the most unexpected choices lead us to the most incredible transformations.